On all my videos, I give away an Amazon gift card. To find out how to win, please like, comment, and subscribe. When humanity was oppressed by mysterious beings known as the celestial hosts, 5 exceptional mages teamed up to defeat them. In fear that these formidable enemies would return, the 5 most powerful mages known as the manhwa built a magical dome and a tower to contain them. Since then, the 5 strongest mages of every generation are tasked with monitoring of the dome from the top of the wizard's tower. Inspired by this story, childhood friends Serfort and 𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐋𝐀𝐈𝐌𝐄𝐑 Serfort promised each other that they would climb to the top of the tower. Now a 6th-year student at the regarded Magic Academy, Will's future looks bleak as he has no magic abilities whatsoever. However, blessed with an exceptional physique, Will is able to slay monsters in the labyrinth and prevail against skilled magicians with the aid of only his sword and a few magical items. Will is determined to not let anyone or anything prevent him from keeping the promise he made to 𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐋𝐀𝐈𝐌𝐄𝐑. Will was embroiled in fighting a red bear in the dungeon. After many acrobatic maneuvers, he finally managed to land a critical hit, killing the bear. But his work just started as the bear's nuclear and extended family turned up to avenge him. A few hours later, Will is back freshened up and already in class like nothing happened. One of his fellow classmates answered a magical-related question and the teacher wanted a demonstration. He then noticed that Will was asleep. He called out to him 3 times, and on the 3rd time, Will jumped up like he had been stung. He apologized to Professor Edward, who then called him to the front of the class. Knowing what was about to happen, he accepted his fate and answered. Will was then put through the agonizing process of a class humiliation, where his classmates made fun of him as he tried and failed to perform a simple experiment. He recited the spell and stretched out his wand, but absolutely nothing happened. The whole class burst into laughter and Professor Edward calmed them down. Edward then went on a self-serving monologue that could have been written by a white male man in the 1930s. Just after, Cheyenne, one of his classmates, used a fire spell to start the experiment that Will failed to, and he looked on as the flame turned blue on the crystal. The teacher scolded him half-heartedly and Cheyenne jokingly brushed it aside. After the class, Cheyenne came and taunted Will for being a failure in class, but Colette, one of Will's classmates and one of the few that didn't laugh, appeared like a ninja and stormed towards Cheyenne to defend Will. But he went the coward's route and insulted Will's ambition to become a manhwa. They soon left and Will and Colette went on a walk. They stopped at a garden where Will looked up and admired the tower that was visible from anywhere in the kingdom. He reminisced on how the 5 mages saved them and brought peace to the world. He then reaffirmed his resolve, much like Naruto did about becoming Hokage. Later, in his mentor Professor Worker's office, Will was getting a stern talking to because he went to the dungeon without permission again, but Will, having been poor all his life, knew how to grovel and plead while down on all 4s. But even after that, he couldn't wait to be awarded his credits for killing an evil guard bear. His teacher worried that he might not meet the required credits needed to go to the Advanced Institute. He advised Will that his method of advancing through dungeon credits alone is practically impossible, like in all shonen anime. But Will wouldn't give up. His teacher then gave him the task of earning 4 credits by the end of the week to make up the credits he didn't get in the last exams because he was a no magic muggle mage. Will saw that he had no choice but to find the 4 credits as it was 2 days to the end. His professor gave him a tip on a 4-credit monster on the 6th floor, and Will couldn't resist hugging like a middle-aged American woman. Unknown to them, Cheyenne was eavesdropping and planned to use the dungeon as a place to get rid of no magic Will. Much later, Will was in the dungeon with his trusty animal sidekick, while Cheyenne and 2 of his lackeys were in the dungeon planning on killing the Baskerville that Will was hunting so that he won't be able to graduate. One of the boys wondered if it was safe, but Cheyenne was too overconfident to even think straight. Just as he was about to turn and give orders, one of the boys flew past him like a football and landed hard on the wall. Cheyenne turned and saw that the hunter has indeed become the hunted. Will heard the scream of the 2nd lackey in the distance and ran to help them. When he got there, he saw that they were being attacked by an evil sentinel, a 10-credit monster. He wondered what it was doing so far up and turned and saw that the monster was attacking Cheyenne, who fearfully shot fireballs and was on the verge of crying. Will had an emotional moment where he debated whether to save Cheyenne after all Cheyenne had put him through. After a while, he decided to help them and ran like Quicksilver to block the swing of the monster's sword aiming for Cheyenne. Moments after, Edward entered Workner's office and told him that Cheyenne and his lackeys had entered the dungeon floor 6 without his permission, but Workner told him not to worry since Cheyenne was there. He turned on his magic version of Cable, a crystal ball, and tuned it to dungeon floor 6 to view the battle between Will and the evil sentinel. In the battle below, Will severed the finger of the monster, causing it to attack in anger, but he dodged them. The monster couldn't keep up with his speed, and even Cheyenne was amazed at what he was seeing. In the office, Edward was surprised that Will was this amazing, like a superhero keeping his powers a secret. After dodging most of its attacks, Will disarmed the monster and took its sword. He then used the sword to divide the monster into two while Cheyenne looked like a fan. Will came to help Cheyenne after the battle, but Cheyenne clenched his teeth to keep his hatred in. Even Edward chose not to believe what he saw. Will had always been scorned all his life. He was used as bait to lure his friend Elferia, and now that she had become a Mangiavander, he wasn't needed anymore. Even Worker was surprised when he first witnessed the boy's strength. All these and more did Will imagine as he daydreamed while class was going on. Professor Worker was teaching them the intricacies of climbing the tower. Will listened attentively as Worker explained the requirements for passing the Advanced Institute and becoming a Mangiavander. It was either to create a new type of magic, or to earn at least 7,200 credits at the academy. After the class, on their way, they passed a group of people gathered around Cheyenne and his lackeys. One of the boys was telling them how Cheyenne defeated an evil sentinel and Cheyenne looked as guilty as a man caught for public nudity. As they passed, Cheyenne and Will locked eyes. He then charged at Will and knocked his books to the ground in American bully style. Meanwhile, Edward was reporting his findings to the principal and giving her reasons why she can't keep Will in the school, but she was rebutting with good points. She gave him the option of giving Will a test to prove his worth. Later, the students were at the study hall and Will is reading in a way that surpassed the normal route. Even Colette was worried for him. While they were studying, Professor Edward came to meet them and he called Will to the spell hall immediately. They soon arrived. Edward pulled his wand and shoot a warning spell at Will. He then told Will the requirements to pass this test and gave him no time to rest at all. Meanwhile, the headmaster had called for Worker, and she informed him of the test between Edward and Will by showing him a live feed of the battle. The battle showed Edward completely blitzing Will in spells, but him dodging all the spells. Will tried kicking, but Edward's defense was impregnable and it repelled Will away. Edward took the chance to shoot an attack spell that dealt damage. After withstanding the attack, Will stood up and did the Shaman hype-up speech. Edward got angry seeing that and wanted to attack again. Just then, Colette came with his sword and threw it like a supporting ninja. Will caught it and used it to dust Edward's first attack. Edward continued firing, but Will deflected them all with Colette's voice as background noise. Will then flew up with a flashy acrobatic move and hit the ground with force to break the barrier. He then moved to attack, and the match ended in a draw with wand and sword doing a stare-off. Edward could not believe he had just been cut and walked off angrily conceding defeat. Will then passed out immediately. The principal ended the live feed and her and Worker ran post-match analysis. The next morning, Will wakes up before everyone to deliver the daily newspaper. He still finds time to train, which makes his job fun. Inside one of them, he saw an order to the academy from Elferia herself and was really surprised. He ran home immediately to meet his roommate Roasty to make him a magic item. He happily relayed the order to his friend while also changing into his battle outfit. And like the MI7 in any James Bond movie, Roasty was always ready with new upgrades. He then gave him a piece of bread and wished him happy hunting. Will arrive at the mining spot to find that other overachieving students like him were also there mining and hoping for a chance to meet Elferia, including Cheyenne, who was still brooding like a mysterious character. Will descended and was greeted by 3 monster penguins, which he dispatched off in short order with precise strikes to the surprise of the one person around who couldn't believe he used a sword. She quickly got up and thanked him. They exchanged pleasantries and they soon began walking the dungeon together. They both shared their encounters with Elferia, and Iris was screaming like a K-pop fan. As they were searching, Will found tracks of a very powerful ice golem in a cave ahead and moved to kill it. Iris was worried that he might unilive himself, seeing as he doesn't have magic. She doesn't know that he's the main character. Will prepared for battle. He looked up to see a salamander-type ice monster jump down at them. It has multiple eyes and sharp teeth and was weirdly called Frost Rex. Will dodged the first strike, and the monster released an ice beam that he dodged too. Will went to put Iris in a safe place while he went to fight the monster. She urged him not to go, but Will trusted his strength and charged at the enemy while dodging its beams. Iris watched from a distance as Will threw his hook and used it to bind the monster. In a flashy move, he lit the rope and used it to send an explosive attack around the monster, finally igniting the bomb he placed at the end, blowing the monster into the 7 heavens. Meanwhile, behind him, Iris showed her true colors as a spy, but it was oblivious to Will. She switched back immediately, and they went back to the surface. On getting back, Iris wondered how she should report this. She arrived at her destination and opened it to reveal a Mangiavander hall with all the 7 mages present. She apologized for taking a moment of their time and then proceeded to report on the no-talent mage she discovered at the academy. Iris recommended him for a position in the tower, but it was soundly rejected by the head of the mages. The meeting ended with them waiting till the festival was over to decide, and Elferia was optimistic that Will make it to the tower. The 6th-year students were having a magic practice session, and Will failed woefully, getting knocked down by his practice golem. The top 3 students in the class outshined others with their excellent magic, each of them having passed the 10,000-point requirement to move to the Advanced Institute. Will watch sadly as the 3 best mages square off for war in the Grand Magic Festival, while he could only boast of just 5,045 credits in his final year. On his way out, Julius, the 3rd best, went out of his way to bully Will, and he hastily stood up to let him pass, while his bootlickers sang his praises behind him. During break time, 𝐃𝐈𝐒 announced that Will has to get scouted at the Grand Magic Festival, since he had no chance of graduating on writing and praxis alone. They then discussed the perks of being scouted in the festival competitions and being chosen by one of the 7 factions of the Manhwa. 𝐃𝐈𝐒 also imagined what would happen if a watcher happened to be at the festival, but Will told her that her hopes were too high for such a poor noble. 𝐃𝐈𝐒 tried to convince him to enter the competition, but he vehemently denied, preferring instead to work behind the scenes. He had tried it once before in his 2nd year, but he was booed and pelted with refuse and other unspeakable things. The day went on with different students practicing their magic at different locations in the academy. They were helping each other hone their skills in preparation for the Magic Festival. Will and 𝐃𝐈𝐒 watched all these things from a window in one of the towers. They also discussed all the other paths Will could follow if he couldn't ascend the tower. 𝐃𝐈𝐒's argument lasted till they got to their lockers. As Will was putting his books back, 𝐃𝐈𝐒 discovered a hidden barrier. Will's familiar broke down the spells, and they opened it to see a staircase leading to an underground gambling den run by students. They were surprised to see Cheyenne, who was just about to escape. Cheyenne tried to gaslight them, but 𝐃𝐈𝐒 wouldn't have any of it. She pointed her wand close to his face that Cheyenne had to shut up. She threatened him with violence, and Cheyenne had no choice but to agree. His lackeys decided to use some sarcastic comments disguised as criticisms that made him get angry, leading him to shout on top of his voice like a little girl. He then walked off in anger. The next day, as the professor rounded up his lecture, 𝐃𝐈𝐒 tried to ask Will out for lunch, but after being hit too many times on the head, Will couldn't understand stuffs like that and ignorantly denied and told her that he'll be working at Miss Gina's tavern that night. The tavern is on Slumland Street, outskirts of Garden, the capital of magic. Every day, the dwarf miners come there to drink away their sorrows. Will works as a waiter for Miss Gina's tavern, and today was no different. He delivered an order of food and beer to one of the regulars, who then commented on his work ethic. The customer then commented on him entering for the Grand Magic Festival, but he rejected the idea. He was jolted back to work by Miss Gina, who compared him to his roommate who also worked there as a favor for Will. After the last call, Will and Rusty were cleaning the plates. Soon after, Julius and his lackeys entered the tavern. As soon as he saw Will, Julius went on a segregation rant about inferior races and immigration. The dwarf leader wanted to talk, but others there cautioned him. After, Julius sat down and demanded that food and drink be brought to him. Rusty soon brought them a dish, but the lackeys berated it. Will couldn't take it anymore and walked up to them demanding they take back the insults. Julius kicked the plate off the table while sitting, a near impossible feat in the real world, and it landed on Will's shirt. He got pissed and the lackeys stood up to fight, but they were knocked out soundly in one move. Julius was surprised and immediately brought out his wand to fight. Will dodged the initial attack, but soon got overpowered due to the small space. Julius tried to gloat, but stopped, seeing the look of defiance in Will's eyes. Julius then dared Will to enter the Grand Magic Festival, so that he can humiliate him fully. Will accepted on the condition that Julius apologizes to the dwarf if he wins and he leaves the academy if he loses. After a rousing monologue, the headmaster declared the Grand Magic Festival open amid fanfare and fireworks. Scouts from different factions prepare to lock in and find the next big magic diamond in the rough. The dragon riding competition, or sky race, was the first event, and it ended with Lehana winning with a new lap record. There were a couple of surprises in the competitions, and all the scouts were on high alert. Earlier, 𝐃𝐈𝐒 asked Cheyenne if he would join her team, and he was happy that she had finally come to her senses. As he entered, he was surprised to find out that he was in the same team as Will and voiced his protests, but 𝐃𝐈𝐒 gave him logical points which he couldn't help but join after seeing that Julius and Will locked eyes. Soon after, the main event for the day, Crown Attack, started with the elves creating the arena with a shiny display of magic. The arena is divided into different zones, and each 3-man team is expected to make their way from the outer edges to the central stadium, and any team to first take the crown at the end of the stadium wins. Professor Edward gave a little in-game concept analysis, but the spotlight was stolen by the commentator, who announced that Will is in Team 6, the same team as Cheyenne. This caused a ripple of laughter to spread in the spectator stands. The competition started, and Werner was surprised to see Will as a competitor. The battle started, and the boxes on the field turned out to be golems. Will and his team charged, and with the help of 𝐃𝐈𝐒, Will landed a magic-infused super punch on a golem that sent it flying into other golems. The students were surprised to silence, and Team 6 was the first to break through the golem thicket with Will going on a one-man rampage. Meanwhile, Cheyenne remembered all that happened in the dungeon the last time and vows not to let it happen again. They soon reach another part of the battling zone where the boxes shoot rock boulders. Will and Colette execute a two-man attack where she conjured swords and Will threw them at the boxes, destroying them. They are soon out of the battling zone and Cheyenne hadn't done anything of note. Other teams are struggling with the traps except Julius's team, who has frozen all the monsters around. Julius soon left his team to go forward. Soon, Will triggers another trap set by Professor Edward and completely destroys it. They soon arrive at the woodland zone where Will was almost hit by an icicle from Julius. Julius sends a wave of icicles and Will dodges each one of them with practice ease. Cheyenne uses this moment to farm some aura by activating his ultimate spell, shooting a massive fireball like Dragon's Breath. Fortunately, Will survive due to Colette protecting him. In a strange turn of events, Cheyenne attacked Will. Julius also used that moment to attack and disarm Colette. Will tried to dissuade him, but Cheyenne had the privileged white male look in his eye and demanded that Will pick up his sword and fight him. To protect his life and that of Colette's, Will had no choice but to fight. Before the battle, Cheyenne reminisced on his first meeting with Will. He tried to make him an underling, but Will gave him the ultimate cold shoulder. Cheyenne went after him, but he gave him a very intense look that scared the noble. Ever since then, he had despised him. In present day, Cheyenne is hurling fireball after fireball at Will, and he dodged everything. He then used his sword to deflect the fire whip that Cheyenne conjured and hurled at him, but he couldn't deflect all as one of them snaked on his leg, almost getting him. But he cut himself loose, heating up his sword in the process. They had a typical shaman battle episode dialogue, and the battle resumed with Will wondering what he had done wrong. Meanwhile, in the arena, everyone was surprised at the falling out of Team 6, but Professor Edward being the only happy one about this issue. As this was happening, Rosti and Iris met up, and they began to cheer for Will together. They conversed like they knew each other from somewhere. They both expressed interest in Will's unique talent. Meanwhile, Julius was toying with Colette in a separate part of the arena. This was when people started to notice something different about the competition. Julius was everywhere. They wondered how he got to be at different places at once, all at the same time. Julius appeared to Wignall, the second best student, and prepared to attack, but Wignall attacked first and Julius turned out to be an ice statue. The commentator was cheering on Wignall and his team, but it was only due to him betting on them with his life savings. The battle between Cheyenne and Will continued with neither of them giving an inch. While Will was reminiscing about his Naruto-like childhood with sad music, he was so fixated on his goal to meet Elfaria they couldn't afford to look at anything else. Cheyenne summoned a fire phoenix and launched it as an attack on Will. He dodged and the phoenix turned back to attack him. He was able to dodge but was left panting for breath. The faction scouts took notice of this precise magic control from Cheyenne and recommended him in their reports. After successfully deflecting the fireball, the two of them are at an impasse, both tired from fighting. They continued their fight dialogue and Cheyenne sent some emotional things that changed the way Will saw him. He then decided to give it his all in this very moment. They both readied themselves and Cheyenne recited his spell with the guardian behind him. He finished and launched the large-scale attack with the fire phoenix, and with animator's bliss and plot armor. Will was able to slice the Guardian's core and immediately launch an attack on Cheyenne. He tried to defend, but Will was relentless. They were stopped by a slab of earth and the shrill cry of a girl with half her clothes burned off by the name of Colette. She told them that she kicked Julius's butt and he disappeared. Cheyenne then turned red after properly seeing Colette's state of affairs. He worried for her virtue, but she shouted him down. She then told Will to go and settle his score with Julius. However, before he left, he gave her his magic coat and then left the Cheyenne shouting after him like a lover scorned. The first team to enter the central stadium was Team 9 led by Julius. They waved at the audience like practiced politicians. Just as the commentator was announcing their home run, Will dropped like the bomb into the arena just behind Julius. He turned with cinematic effect to see Will challenging him, and a wide smile spread on his face like Santa just gave him his wish for Christmas. In the Mage Tower, Elfaria, one of the Magiavander, was being attended to by her handmaiden. She received a nasty slap to the back of the head for sleeping on duty. Her handmaiden showed her the pictures of the potential candidates that the scouts are recommending. Elfaria checked them out and saw that the number one candidate was Julius, who was already being tipped as her successor. The fight between Will and Julius is about to begin, and Will circles them like a lion hunting. Julius tried for a snarky comment, but Will had the best response for him. Julius then decided to go the Jim Crow route. His first attack was a smoke screen that covered Will's vision. As he was trying to adjust, an icicle came flying out of the fog, but he deflected it and ran in the direction it came from. Two more icicles came flying out and he dodged them. When the smoke cleared, he saw that there were lots of Julius in the arena. One of them moved closer to Will and chose the path of the extremist and blew himself up. freezing Will in place with the explosion. Will realized that he was using Elfaria's magic. Julius then boasted about how he was much better than the Magiavander and Elfaria, and that enraged Will. He broke free and charged at the real Julius, but the clones pushed him back as they could also use magic. Julius's lackeys then taunted Will, so he was distracted. Julius then used his clones to construct a remote barrier where he could trap Will inside, and he succeeded. Will tried breaking it from inside, but to no avail. Julius then created a huge icicle that crashed into where Will was standing. Everyone in the stands were stunned silent, but Professor Edwards still managed to sneak in a little propaganda. Julius then walked up and proclaimed himself as Elfaria's successor in front of all the scouts, but Rosti was still confident that Will win. As he was talking, he looked back in surprise as Will cut the ice boulder and destroy it completely to reveal Will farming aura by taking a nice pose. He wondered how he was able to survive, but Will said his magic helped him cool off in a cool line. Julius then commanded his remaining clones to fire icicles, and the objects went flying like heat-seeking missiles aiming for Will. He dodged it with ease and speed, blitzed them appearing behind them while explaining the flaws in their technique. Will immediately dispatched of the two lackeys by hitting them by the base of their skull, and they crashed down like mannequins. Even Professor Edward was impressed by the attack sequence. Just then, Julius's clones began to crumble, and the students wondered what happened. Will then revealed that Julius was controlling his clones with the help of his teammates, lending him their magic. In a fit of rage, Julius shot ice vines which Will cut into pieces. He then converted them into a bomb, but Will was able to withstand that too. When the smoke cleared, Will was surrounded by a lot of Julius clones. They began chanting a spell, causing huge boulders to come from the sky, but Will dodged them with practiced ease, weaving through them like knife through butter. Julius began to contemplate on his next line of action. He banked on Will not knowing who the real one is to be decisive in him getting a victory. But Will proved him wrong by guessing on the first try. He tried to weakly defend himself, but Will destroyed it with his sword. He then sent an ice block as a gift to Julius's stomach, causing him to lose his breath. He wondered how Will was able to know, and will explain how he figured it out. Even after that, Julius was still stuck in his standoffish ways. Will used that to teach him a lesson on Elfaria, and he launched a counterattack on Julius, with both his words and his swords. He called him a naked emperor, and Julius couldn't believe his ears. He then burst into a maniacal laughter like the Joker and decided to cast more clones while Will prepared for battle. Julius hoped to use sheer numbers to weigh Will down, but the theme song started to play, meaning that Will would never lose. Julius then launched an ice spell that required the icicles to perform a parade, flying first before attacking their target. Will dodged them with ease and took down the first clone. He then took down 3 in quick succession, and the animators decided to flex on us by showing us his speed. He then continued destroying them until it remained the original, which will finish with a well-placed punch. He hit the ground and passed out immediately, to the surprise of everyone. After the battle, Colette and Cyan came running towards him, and the students expected them to take the crown. However, Wignall appeared in front of the crown and claimed it as his. The commentator was happy that he won and joyfully announced the winner. Cheyenne, however, made it his life's mission to defeat Will any means necessary. Colette, however, went to treat Will and fawn over his body. After the battle, the dwarves threw a banquet and raised a toast to Will at Miss Gina's tavern. They all greeted Will and his friends and made them feel welcome, and Professor Werkner was, however, going round thanking all the dwarves. The party ran till late at night, and the village elder asked if Will was scouted, but Colette answered negatively. She then blames it all on Cheyenne. The village elder was happy that they got their apology, and also that Julius was washing plates in the back and his lackeys too. The next day, the week-long school tradition mirrored. It was a week where students formed parties and ventured into the dungeon. Will and Colette were walking in the halls when they were stopped by some students wanting Will to join their party. It soon became a contest between different parties until Will was boxed into a corner with everyone wanting a piece of the new guy. Colette stepped in to defend Will, but he was super elated that this was happening to him. As a last-ditch method, Colette had no choice but to conjure up an impromptu date for tomorrow. Later that night, she was really nervous, but her friend tried to use it as a time to wear a slutty outfit. When Rusty heard, he had a sneaky look on his face as he planned his next move. The next day, Will and Colette met at the St. Viola Square by the statue. Colette was dressed all fashionable, and Will was dressed like every other day, but she found it appealing. He complimented her, and she lost all sense of reasoning. Just then, Rossi appeared, having run all the way. He introduced himself as Will's roommate and wanted to tag along. His first action was to lock fingers with Will like a lover. Colette was thrown away and tried every possible means to try and get Will alone, but Rossi was always there to block her. On one of the rare occasions they were alone, she quickly asked him who Rosti was, but Will was painfully oblivious to Rosti's feelings, even if they share a cup of juice together. Rosti then suggested that Will go take care of his sword. He accepted and left the two mages alone on the park bench. Colette went straight to the point and accused him of Will hogging, but Rosti went all nerdy on her and they were in a standoff of who loves Will more so much that people started to notice them. Meanwhile, Will just attributed their attitude to them not getting along. On his way to the maintenance shop, he was stopped by Lehana, who looked like she had been waiting for hours. He was surprised to see her there and she asked for a moment of his time. He agreed and they arrived at a tea house where other people were waiting, the top 4 of the academy. Lehana wanted 5 of them to form a party to enter the dungeon. Julius and Cyan immediately asked what Will was doing there. Julius even offered to put him on ice like frozen chicken. But Lehana was clueless to all that happened. Shan wanted to lay hands on Will but was stopped by Wignall, who cast illusion magic to disorient them. They all settled down to listen to what Lehana has to say and she made solid points. However, Julius objected and Cyan straight up went all privileged. She used their dream of being Magiavander to lure them into agreeing and even Will couldn't resist. Later that night, Will met up with Colette and Rosti and informed them of his decision to form a party with Lehana. The next day, Professor Workner informed the students of the ban on floor 7 to 10 being lifted in 10 days. He informed them of the dangers involved and each of them steeled their resolve as they take on the dungeon. As they prepared, Colette wouldn't leave Will's side and Lehana had no choice but to agree. Soon, the professors were giving the students their final pep talks before the student praxis launched. The student praxis being held became the talk of the town. The students leaped into action as the praxis was declared open and Will experienced his first campaign with mages, Will ready to fight, but Lehana took care of the monsters in front with her rare fighting ability. While they fought, Will wondered whether he will be able to kill more monsters as the mages were dispersing more of them than he did. The mages left the battlefield as they couldn't be bothered to pick up the items dropped. Colette was worried, but Will was pumped for fighting. A day passed and they stopped to rest in a cavern. Wignall casted a fake magic flame to keep the monsters at bay, and despite being in the same party, Wignall wouldn't allow Will to touch him, as he considers him less. As they rested, Lehana shared her plans with the rest of the party. She planned to go after the luminous Neighborus, a one-of-its-kind monster worth 110 credits. Meanwhile, in the lower levels, a treacherous enemy awaited them. Lehana and her party took the shortcut down the dungeon to meet the floor boss at level 10. On their way, Julius commented on the different monster corpses littered around. They soon got close to the floor boss room. Upon arriving there, the place was eerily quiet, and they lit a mage light to see that the boss was already dead. They immediately began to search their surroundings. Meanwhile, Will had this nagging feeling inside. He stilled himself for a few seconds and immediately went on alert, looking up above them. Red eyes stared at him and soon, a magic beam came flying at him. He immediately raised an alarm and went to use his sword to deflect the beam. Before he could recover, the monster landed and took out Wignall first. They all started their spells at the same time, but there was no time as the monster broke the floor, dropping them to the floor below. The resulting shockwave was felt in the base camp, and Rosti worried for his forbidden love. Will tried to save Wignall and caught him. They landed in a place similar to the insides of the digestive tract. Will saw that Wignall's arm was broken and the rest of them were scattered every which way in floor 11. Wignall woke up dreaming about his past, just as Will was finishing off one of the many monsters that were attacking them. Wignall initially had amnesia, but he quickly regained his senses and went back to default segregation. As Wignall was proving stubborn and wanting to decide his fate himself, Will took stock of the remaining weapon items and medicine they have. They didn't have enough medicine, although they had food. Meanwhile, on floor 8, the base camp was in disarray and the professors in charge were already unalived with their heads missing. There was a monster stampede from the lower levels that overrun the camp. In floor 11, Wignall and Will were working together, but Wignall was proving as stubborn as a hungry baby. Although after Will explained his plan to him, he had no choice but to agree. This just made him angrier. Soon after, they were attacked by Gurjasa from both sides and had no choice but to fight. Wignall quickly dispatched the one facing him, and as he looked back, he saw Will uniliving 3 beasts with ease. As he was being a fanboy, Wignall forgot to finish one of the beasts and it attacked him. He tried to use illusion magic, but it wouldn't work. Will had no choice but to use his dagger to stab the beast's eye and finish him off in a flashy way. After the battle, Wignall laughed at himself for being a wuss, and Will tried to use positive reinforcement to cheer him up. While they were taking a break, Wignall then shared a secret with Will. He was also one of the elven runts. He was the only elf still at the academy after 6 years. Meanwhile, Lehana and Colette were searching for a way out, and Lehana was passing the time by spouting some pessimistic propaganda. She used the example of her seeing Elfaria ascend the tower while being a first year to justify the fact that they are the cargo that nobody wants. Wignall also faced a similar situation with his childhood friend Eleanor, who was so talented that she became a Magiavander at a young age, leaving Wignall behind to catch up to her. Despite all he heard, Will decided to only hear the part where they had something in common. Wignull tried to go the self-pity route, but Will wouldn't allow him. He promised to take care of him and get him to safety. The fight continued with Wignull providing support and Will destroying the enemies in an instant with his sword. Wignull was amazed at the speed and endurance he had. He then thanked him for his protection. Soon after, he began to hear a strange noise deep within the dungeon. The sound of the dungeon birthing more monsters. Will lay in wait as the dungeon birthed the new monster. As soon as it came out, Will's action was to throw a bomb and take Wignull and his familiar as safe as possible away from the monster. The new monsters were Balkar, magic-resistant beasts that are only affected with elven magic. Wignull still didn't believe in himself, but Will gave him a main character pep talk and he was right as day. Will then began to attack, but his sword had almost no damage. Wignull prepared himself and fired his first spell that did absolutely nothing on the monster. They fired a fireball and Will's familiar blocked it while Wignull had a midlife crisis and an evolution to the next plane of elf magic. He recovered and fired a counterspell that created a forest of trees and wiped out the monsters. Afterwards, Wignull apologized for his earlier rudeness and Will put it behind him, and they shook hands for the future ahead. Will and Wignull started to track the rest of the party, and they soon came about a place where Julius and Cyan had fought the enemy. Meanwhile, Cyan and Julius just arrived at another part of the dungeon, and they were hunted by a group of evil sentinels who can hide from the search magic. Cyan decided to take the lead and confidently asked Julius to create his clones as cannon fodder. He had already tasted defeat from Will. The only way was up. As this was going on, the rest of the students were attacked by evil sentinels, but they were rescued by Professor Edward. Professor Worker also came just in time to catch Edward with a cool maneuver, and they rode a sky racer in the tight corners of the dungeon. They decided to go after Lehana's team, and Worker decided to use his crystal ball as a mini-TV. As Colette and Lehana were exploring the dungeon floor, Colette laid clues for others to follow at certain intervals. Lehana tried to lose faith in herself, but Colette wouldn't let her. Will and Wignull were still searching for others. They soon entered an open space where fresh monster meat is on the menu. They saw that both Cyan and Julius had dispatched of the large group of evil sentinels. In the other part of the dungeon, Colette sensed a mage just around the corner, but Lehana was wary. The mage turned out to be Professor Bruno. At least that was what they thought. The professor's head fell from the body, and the headless man gave them a gentlemanly bow while still holding another head. The headless man began to write words in the air, which magically turned to speech, and another enemy approached them. The girls were lost for words about who the new villains were. The headless man declared that they want to destroy the barrier and mockingly pleaded for the girls to unlive peacefully. The headless man sent a beam of magic like a slice, but it was deflected by Will and the rest of the squad. The villains escaped, and they instead summoned the beast that scattered the party, the evil Grand Duke, worth over 270 credits. As soon as it arrived, it released a barrage of heat-seeking magic beams, and they all dodged it. They then tried to run, and Wignull tried to buy some time with his illusion magic, but it couldn't do a thing. The monster continued to fire beams like Kamehameha blasts while the party went to look for a place to hide. They soon started to feel fatigue, but Will was of the opinion that the only way forward is true killing the monster. Julius tried to be the voice of reasoning, but his voice fell on deaf ears. The rest of the party quickly agreed to let Will lead, as he is the most experienced of them in the dungeon. After listening to their words, he graciously accepted and even tried to sway Julius, who ended up agreeing. They soon came to face the evil Grand Duke, with Julius using his clones to cast a very advanced ice spell. The others used basic spells to try and distract the monster before Julius finished, and Will tried to attack and found the enemy skin to be impenetrable. As soon as he finished, Julius activated a spell that shot multiple icicles at the monster, but it didn't even leave a scratch. Lehana then tried to use her speed to land an attack, but the monster had an auto barrier cast that deflected the attack. The barrier also released magic beams, and Will tried to save Lehana. In the process, one of the beams destroyed his trusty goggles. The others tried to rally round and attack the beast, but they couldn't do anything. They all thought of running away. Will asked Cyan for a weird request to hit him, and Cyan was all too happy to land slaps like an African mother punishing her child. After that, his hands stopped trembling, and Will picked up his sword to continue the fight. Colette gave a very Sakura-like speech, and it weirdly worked on Cyan. Meanwhile, Will charged at the monster, and Lehana gave him a spell that covered his sword in lightning, and Will completed the one-man magic and sword combo, and he landed a blow. Just then, Cyan showed up with his Guardia and decided to go plus ultra with his fireball, and the monster staggered, but he soon shook off the damage. Seeing that nothing could work on the evil Grand Duke, they all began to give up hope, but Will saw a memento of his childhood, and he fully locked in. He picked his sword and called out to Cyan, who immediately shot a fire spell on his sword. The sword immediately consumed the spell, and it was covered in flames. Will had awakened his Mangekyo Sharingan. He attacked the monster and executed a series of beautiful animated moves and sliced the monster Q. Everyone in the party looked on with open mouths at the dead monster and Will's fiery sword. As soon as he was done fighting, he became really tired and let down his guard. Just then, a horde of sentinels and guards appeared, charging at them. Just as they were about to attack, a flashy light spell activated and killed all the monsters in an instant. The smoke cleared to reveal the spear-like wand of the Light Sovereign Wand and the cane of the Mangiavander in the dungeon. It looked like he was on his way back from dungeon exploring. The Light Sovereign gave the mages a very rousing speech, and they all knelt down and bowed to the Light King. Meanwhile, a strange figure carrying a huge bag walked up to Will and introduced himself as Finn. Meanwhile, the villains had achieved their aim of entering the dungeon and they began laying their plans for the future. Soon after, the student praxis was cut short due to the living of 11 professors, but there were no student casualties this year. There were many questions left unanswered and the survivors all wanted answers. In the sick bay, Lehana tried to give a rousing speech, but her empty stomach betrayed her. Colette brought some apples for her and proceeded to feed her a few, but she kept asking for more and soon finished it until there wasn't any left for Will. She then tried to justify her bring a foodie, but Colette wouldn't hear of it. Julius still decided to stay on his high horse, and Colette was forced to stuff a whole apple into his mouth to keep him from talking. Cyan then mentioned Will's newfound power, and everyone commented on how cool and awesome it looked. They asked where he was hiding such power, but he didn't have an answer for them. He then asked of the little guy that came to greet him. Lehana told him he was from the Finn tribe. They cannot use magic, but they have extensive knowledge about the dungeon, so they act as guides and supporters for the mages. In the headmaster's office, Finn brought her a gift in the form of a broken blade from their skirmish in the dungeon. He asked her to analyze the blade while he goes back into the dungeon. He then went on to ask why he wasn't informed about Will. She explained, but it wasn't sufficient evidence for him to just agree. He decided to take on a supervisory role going forward. The next day, Will was already up and about, swinging his sword for early morning training. The rest of the mages observed him from the upper window, but only Cyan decided he was that much of a blockhead to challenge Will. They continued their match from the festival, and Will was all too happy to have found friends. Thank you for completing this amazing and magical journey with me. If you like this story, do well to check out our YouTube channel for more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications bell so that you won't miss any of our new videos. Always remember, with strength and confidence, you can overcome anything.